Thank you. Yeah, it would help if I use a microphone. Thank you. I'd like to thank John Soliman from Wealth and Risk Management, Mike from New England Aviation, whose spaces is airports, and the FAST team reps. We're all volunteers. We do this because we're selfish. We fly in the same space that you fly in. So if you're safe, we're safe. So just kind of keep that in mind. So, welcome. Doug Auclair is a Master CFII. With that, I welcome you and welcome Doug.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Happy New Year, Doug.
Happy New Year. First, thanks for coming. I'm very excited to be here doing this seminar for everyone. I'm going to be getting more involved in the seminars, and I have a few other people I'm going to drag in with me because over the past year or so we've kind of had the same things going on, and I hope that we can kind of keep it new and exciting. So thank you for coming, and we will get started. The title of the seminar is called What is a Pilot? My seminars, I like to have crowd participation, so at various times I will stop. Feel free to raise your hand. We'll try to take a couple people, different people, every time I stop so that everybody can get their fair shot at yelling something out loud and being on the videotape. So I'm going to start off the seminar, and I'm going to ask the question to all of you and George, what is a pilot? It's a navigator, someone says, okay? Feel free. Someone who flies an airplane. Anything else? A guy that drives ships up the Narragansett Bay. We call him Howard. He's not here. Anything else? Don't be shy. You guys can talk. I'm not even embarrassed. Okay. A pilot, we are our own brains, okay? So we spend a lot of time going around reading books, reading articles, listening to guys talk in front of PowerPoint presentations to hone our skills and become more intelligent. What it all boils down to is we are all in our own brain. And all of our piloting skills, due to the fact that we don't have feathers or hollowed bones, are solely in our brain, in two halves of that. What we think our brains look like as pilots are cool lightning shows, and they're just the greatest things that any of us have probably ever thought of. What they really look like is a gelatinous ball of pink goo, which isn't quite as exciting, but still functional. So we have two halves of our brain. And for all intents and purposes with this seminar, we're going to break it down pretty simply into the practical side and the theoretical side. The practical side controls spatial orientation, eye-hand coordination, reaction times. It's really kind of what we think to ourselves as the badass fighter pilot. Every time we get in our 152 and we think that we're doing strafing runs over the tower. We used to have the USS Saratoga down in the bay that people could fly over. That was always fun to think you were buzzing at 1,000 feet above the obstacle. Most pilots, typically when they walk in and learn how to fly, kind of possess this common personality trait. And what that is you generally have a strong practical side of your brain. You're driven, you have coordination, you're spatially aware, and you want to fly. Every time you fly, you use this side of your brain. It's exercised. So it sees a lot more constant practice. And anytime you fly, whether you only fly in the traffic pattern at North Central State Airport or you're flying 747s to Hong Kong, you always are using this side of your brain. So it's constantly practiced with every flight and expanded with your new experiences that can happen regardless of the situation changing or stagnating. The theoretical side of our brain controls rules, logic, theoretical knowledge, or bookwork. It's kind of the nerdy bookworm side of our brain. Most pilots, I can tell you from years of experience and thousands of hours of spoon-feeding people the stuff out of the book, that most people, when they come in, they basically don't want to read the books. They just want to fly the planes and buzz the towers, okay? And pretend, they're in Top Gun. So typically, however strong your practical side is, your theoretical side usually follows. Sometimes it's different, and pilots will have a stronger theoretical side than practical side. It's rare. I've basically seen it once in about 200 students. So it's atypical for the theoretical side to greatly outweigh the practical side. This side of your brain kind of can stagnate. Once you get your pilot's license, I don't know how many of you have been flying for extended periods of time. From the look of it, it looks like a few. What happens is you fall into a flying routine. So you come in and you're going to go to Plymouth on Saturday. But next Saturday, you're going to go to Fitchburg. All right? And then 2 Saturdays after that, guess where you're going to go? Plymouth. It's awesome. But in 3 Saturdays, you're going to go to Block Island. It's going to be totally different. You're going to cycle those 3 airports typically throughout your flying routine, and the theoretical side of your brain kind of stagnates because it never really gets exposed to new experience or new events. And what happens is the stuff that you learned when you got your pilot's license, that you studied for and studied for and studied for, starts to just decay, and you start to lose it a little bit, and you start to become comfortable and complacent. So I call the combination of those two sides, all right, what happens is those are always kind of tugging on each other. Your brain powers combine to form a creepy green-haired superhero guy. Yes. Or situational awareness. That's Captain Planet, in case you guys didn't know, from the famous 90s cartoon series Captain Planet. So your brains are tangled in a lover's quarrel, okay? Basically, husband and wife, they're always, one wants to do one thing, the other wants to do other. If you just kind of let them sit and stagnate, they become miserable. What happens is the tug of war is constantly used as pilots to go through the decision-making process, okay? So every time we fly as pilots in our own brain, we're encountering a series of decisions that we have to make that are going to have one of two outcomes. We're going to safely complete our flight, or something bad's going to happen. So for the most part, what happens is as we fall into flying routines and different things, we fall into comfort zones, and we will typically repeat the same things that we do with success. And the kind of quarrel, the tug that has to go back and forth between these two sides of the brains will kind of diminish and stagnate. What contributes to the decision-making process or the fight between the two sides of our brains? We really only have one contributing factor when we fly that will either make good or bad decisions. What do we think that is?
Planning.
What was it?
Planning.
Planning, okay. Planning could be something that you do, not really a factor that contributes to decision-making. It's a part of decision-making, but it's not really what we're looking for. Experience, okay. So experience will definitely is a contributing factor, but it's not really the X factor that we're looking for that impacts every single thing that we do. Anyone from the left side of the room? Desire? I desire a lot of things. Your health? Well, your health is also, I guess, a factor, but they make Dayquil for a reason. It's going to be stress, okay? So every single time we fly and every single thing that we plan for and how we're going to do it, what we've done in the past, how we're feeling, they're all stressors, okay? And they contribute to everything that we do. Every decision we make is affected by stress, regardless of what we think or not. So the technical definition of stress is it's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from an adverse or very demanding circumstance. Would anybody agree that flying is an adverse or potentially difficult circumstance? I think so. I have a really hard time with it. Okay? So you hear of accidents and you read accidents reports and you see, oh my God, that guy must have been really stressed out. Why would he fly? And a lot of times people don't understand they're dealing with stress because when we're stressed, the 5 hazardous attitudes start to creep in. And really the kind of main point of this seminar is reviewing the hazardous attitudes and kind of the sliders that relate to them and how when stress trickles through the 2 sides of our brain, it affects these attitudes and the decisions that we make. Okay, so does anybody remember the 5 hazardous attitudes? You just have to remember one. You can say it out loud. What is it? Invulnerability. What's an example of being invulnerable?
Oh, I think I can do it.
I think I can do it.
I can go right through it.
Invulnerability. So it'd be like, it's never going to happen to me because I'm not an idiot. Okay. Okay, great. That's good. I'm glad. So they're not going to be in the exact order because I can only put them in the order that I came. So macho, basically, I'm awesome. Nobody's as good as me. I can land in the strongest 3-knot crosswind you've ever seen. Okay? This is one of the most common. You hear it all the time, especially running a flight school, being an instructor for so long. I've basically heard everything that you can possibly say. I mean, guys come in and they almost crash off the side of the runway on landing. And then they come in and they look and they go, "Did you see my landing?" And I'm shaking because I was on the ground and I saw it. I'm scared. And they say, and I go, "Yeah, that was scary." And they go, "No way. I held the nose wheel off for almost the whole runway. Half of it you were in the dirt." Well, yeah, but the nose wheel was off the ground. All right, okay. Invulnerability, it won't ever happen to me. We just said that. I will never get icing on my airplane, or I will never accidentally fly in a cloud, because I'm just better than that. Is, you know, impulsivity, get-there-itis. Has anybody ever experienced that? I have, yeah. Don't be afraid to raise your hands. Anti-authority. He doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. That guy's an idiot. Most of you are probably saying this right now. Okay? Look at this guy up there. Why did they give him a microphone? And resignation, or I call it the Eeyore complex. And that's just, oh, God, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm going to give up. I don't know why I would keep going. Talking is hard. So as stressors pile onto our mental plates, these hazardous attitudes, and we all possess them, regardless of what we think. We all have these 5 things in us. And if you have somebody who's a friend who's kind of a jerk, they will point them out to you occasionally. It could be to your benefit. But we all have them. You actually have to have these 5 attitudes to be a pilot. You cannot successfully fly an airplane for any period of time to any foreign soil like Plymouth any number of times if you don't actually have these attitudes, because you have to know that you can do it. You have to not fear death every time. You have to have some sense of urgency to get where you're going. You can't always follow the rules exactly. Sorry, Bob. And you can't just give up if something kind of gets in your way, okay? So we need these attitudes. We just don't need them all the way at the far side of the scale that people think we're a jackass. Excuse my language. There's more. There's the hazardous attitudes, and through my experience, what I call their conspiring cousins. Macho. I can fly in 77 knot winds. I don't even care if it's a tailwind. I am the best pilot ever known to man. Has anybody ever met anyone like that? You haven't? Bob's the only one. You don't count. The kind of reflection of the macho attitude is timid. I'm going to wait until the winds are under about 3 knots, 71.8 degrees. I walk my dog, the grass is green, the tires are at 24 psi. I had a good breakfast. Last night was Thursday, and next week it's not going to rain. And then I'm going to fly. Has anybody ever encountered one of those people? Yes. Yeah, all right. You guys are awesome. Invulnerability. That won't ever happen to me. I am the single best pilot on this airport, regardless of what anybody thinks. Now, usually people don't typically say this out loud around a group of other people, but it's the one that you can actually see when people talk, especially if they like to talk about themselves. This is really probably how they feel. The flip side to that is frightened, okay? And what I use as an example of that is, God, last time I flew, when I went to Plymouth, there was another plane on the downwind. Geez, I'm not going there anymore, all right? That's, whoa, all right, that's not good. We probably should still fly if there's other planes in the air, all right? And I'll tell you one thing, when I first started flying, we didn't have onboard traffic on the airplanes. They just wasn't a common thing yet. And as the avionics advanced and became more readily available to all the aircraft operators and general aviation pilots, and we started to have onboard weather, I was amazed at all of the flights I would make to, say, Newport or the middle of nowhere, Turner's Falls, and how many other airplanes were actually out there that I never ever saw one of, but there's all these little radar blips everywhere, and I'm looking at them going, wow, this is crazy. I can't see any of them. So I'm not sure to this day if they're ghosts or they actually exist, but it seems like there's a lot of planes, so you don't want to be too scared. Impulsivity. Let's go. We gotta go. I have to be there. We gotta go. Hurry up. What are you doing? At some point, I can say that I'm pretty sure that almost all of you have done this once. Does anybody disagree? Has anyone never been impulsive for any reason whatsoever? Tim? That's Tim. Everybody say hi, Tim. We've all experienced at some point to some level the get-there-itis of needing to be somewhere and having a deadline and going in the airplane when maybe we should have taken a deep breath and said, as pissed off as they might be, it would probably be a good decision to not go. Myself as a commercial pilot, I've done it before. One time last winter, I had a flight, it was just a flight for a private owner out of Bedford down to Baltimore in a Cirrus, and what was happening was they were going there for business. They just had to be there. So every hour, I'm getting a message. All right, are we good to go? Are we good to go? Are we good to go? And I'm looking at the weather, and there's this giant snowstorm. Does everybody remember the big snowstorm from last year creeping up the coast? And it's getting closer and closer and closer. What's the one thing that everybody's flight instructor, I hope, has always told them in regards to weather, especially hazardous weather? What don't you want to do? You don't want to race it, right? You don't want to try to beat that weather somewhere, okay? Because typically the results are poor for the pilot. So I'm thinking and I'm thinking and I'm thinking and I'm going, oh wow, these people are paying me a lot of money. I really should go. The plane's certified into known icing, the visibility. Well, finally, about 30 minutes before the flight, I call them up and I say, I'm sorry, there's just no way that we can possibly get to Baltimore and have conditions in which we would be able to land, because it was, you know, heavy snow, 1,000-foot visibility, and I mean, if anybody has ever flown in a snowstorm in the actual snowy blizzard conditions, you know that even underneath the clouds, you just can't see anything. You could have the coolest high-tech infrared cameras you want on your plane. You're insane if you go and you're flying to minimums in conditions like that. I called up, I explained that, and here I am thinking, oh man, these people are going to be pissed off. They thanked me. They said, oh, that's really great. We're glad we have you who, when it's dangerous, you know not to fly. And I was like, oh wow, that's great. You kind of feel exonerated. But it's an external pressure that if somebody is actually upset that you didn't go because of some sort of extenuating circumstance that they may or may not understand, probably not a person you want to take flying too much or continue flying around. Right? I understand that's a kind of a fluid changing thing. Overly cautious is the other side of that. Wow, there might be a snowstorm in December. Just wait till January. Everybody knows pilots that do that. There's plenty of guys and gals that hang it up at the end of September and they don't fly again until May or June. Typically, for whatever reason, these are tailwheel pilots, and you see a lot of guys flipping their airplanes over on the side of the runway come spring. It's unfortunate. Anti-authority. I fly drink when I'm fine. The FAA won't catch fish, Bob. So the flip side to anti-authority is ultra compliant. I mean, rule abiding to the absolute T, where I'm not advocating to break any rules or do anything wrong here, but what I'm saying is if you have a copy of the FAR-AIM and you're following that, you're going to run into problems because you can't always do exactly what it says. So the example I put, I have to make sure I remain 500 feet below this cloud due to FAA regulations. I brought this special cloud scope in order to maintain perfect adherence to the rules. I don't know where he got the cloud scope. That thing sounds cool. But anybody, and to the point of where it's painful, everybody's probably met somebody that is just so rigid when it comes to something that they're difficult to deal with. Would you say so? Most of you have never talked to me for any period of time then. So, you're lost. Resignation. I can't land on runway 15. I have to give up. They're using that runway. Weird. You probably don't want to do that. The other side is pushy. Typically as regular pilots, whether you're working for hire or you're flying for fun, you're not going to see this side of it. This is really, the pushy side of resignation is actually a thing that you almost uniquely see in flight instruction. It's good to a point. You want people who are self-motivated. I can't tell you how many times I've encountered a pilot who they come in and they, like right from lesson 1, they're telling me how they're going to do it and how they want to do it. And it's good to be motivated, but it's another to be kind of insane and come into something that you know very little about and tell someone who's theoretically an expert, according to some bureaucrats in Oklahoma, that I know better than you. I'm ready. I can do this. Over the years, who's a flight instructor? There's some flight instructors here. Has anyone, you guys, you've probably encountered this, right? Someone who just, they know. Mark.
Yeah, so that, I've seen that in situations where there's an comparison. So one guy's buddy soloed in 15 hours, so now he's got 16, he's pushing, he's saying, hey, I must be ready, my friend soloed in 15 hours.
That's a great example. So I run into that, like the logbook counters all the time. I mean, how many hours does it take to do this? I've had people call me on the phone or come in specifically to ask me if they're getting ripped off because they haven't soloed yet. Well, how many hours do you have? 6? Jesus. You even know how to take the chocks off yet? I don't know. I mean, I've been flying for 3 years. I have 6.5 hours. I don't know why I haven't soloed yet. I guess I don't either. Frank.
People who are very successful in whatever they do have a tendency to think that just because they can do whatever they do with great success, they should be able to get into an airplane and fly it.
Sure, and that's one thing, especially as a flight instructor, you run into all the time. People come in, how long is this going to take me? And I give an estimate every time, and I'm very, very, very forthcoming on the fact that this is just an estimate. You could take 500 hours to finish, or you could take 40. I don't know. It'll probably be somewhere in the middle. But what you do is those people that, like, their buddy soloed in 15 hours, so they have to solo, or the guy who got them into flying, who got his pilot's license in 1942, soloed in 2 hours in a J3 Cub, says, oh, it's easy. I don't know why I haven't soloed yet. And this guy has 3 hours, and he's just wondering, well, I should have a license soon. Shouldn't I be done? It's like, well, it's like 1940. That's 70-something years ago. I guess if you have a time machine, you can go back. You could finish in 3 or 4 hours. I don't know. So it's kind of the weird side, but the hazardous attitudes, they're conspiring cousins. Think of it as a slider, one end to the other. We have to maintain somewhere in the middle. So what do we do when we find ourselves at one end of the spectrum? And for the most part, anybody that flies with any sort of regularity, that doesn't always take their instructor and doesn't always just go to Plymouth, you're going to encounter adverse situations that you haven't encountered, or maybe that you knew about but don't really remember, and then you find yourself in, that's going to lead to stress. And one of these hazardous attitudes, or their cousins, are going to kind of start showing their faces. A self-defeating prophecy is people get fixated on this one thing, and especially on the negative side, which is the cousins of the hazardous attitudes. They'll get fixated and they'll be so obsessed with what they're doing wrong and what they can't do that it will drastically affect their ability to do what? To fly the plane, to make an actual decision, correct? So they compromise themselves. So what we have to do is we have to balance the hazardous attitudes and their cousins to maintain a balance of safety, okay? Maintain a balance. Crowd participation, what do you think we do to maintain balance?
Recognize your own, where you are on those 5 items. Which is your bad one?
Recognize those. So typically, Graham brings up a good point when he says, recognize which one is yours, okay? I can't tell you enough. Any of us that think we just have one, we're kind of wrong, because we actually have all 5. You might have one that's more prevalent. Like, you might be a little macho or always want to get there. Does anybody feel like they have one that's probably a little bit higher than the other on the hazardous side? Raise your hand. It's fine. If you don't, you're insane. So, I know I'm insane. I raise both hands. So, we all have them, and you have to uniquely identify where you are on this chart, essentially, that I made in the seesaw, the scale of every time you fly. Because every time you get into the airplane, you're going to have different stressors affecting you prior to even starting that engine. Not even adding in what you're going to encounter in the flight that's going to pour over your head. And some days, does anybody wake up feeling great one day and feeling crappy the other day, and not because you had a rough night last night drinking? Yeah, right, sure, it happens all the time. You really got to kind of identify where you're at on these attitudes every flight, because they change, and they can change on a flight. They can go from you're flying and you're going on a trip out to Poughkeepsie, New York, a really long cross country. It's like 100 miles away. I don't even know how you would get there. I've never been, but I'm sure that with some of your help, I might be able to do it someday. you go out to Poughkeepsie, you decide I'm going to stop at Sky Acres for lunch, okay? Has anybody ever been into Sky Acres? Yeah, it's cool, right? Little bit of a crooked runway, right? You have to basically land uphill so you avoid that little pesky thing called death or carnage of flipping an airplane over a hill. So you go in, we land downhill for some reason, and we get terrified, okay? What happened to make that decision where we came in and landed with a tailwind downhill? What do we think affected us out of kind of those attitudes where just en route we just decided we wanted to do something? Say it out loud.
A moment of stupidity.
A moment of stupidity or impulsivity. We were flying to Poughkeepsie. We had it all planned out. We knew what we were going to do. We knew the runways. We knew everything. And then just as we're flying along, we look down and we see a bunch of airplanes and then look on our ForeFlight and we say, wow, they have food at that place. Yes, I like food. I'm going to stop there. No research. No idea what the traffic pattern's like. No idea what the runway's like. We just went in there. So all of a sudden, a perfectly planned, managed flight, due to one really fast decision that you could have looked down and said, oh, I really want to go there, and spent 45 seconds looking through your flight bag or electronic flight bag, more than likely now, and come up with the correct information you needed to make it a non-eventful landing. I tell this to my students all the time. Any of you who have flown with me, especially instrument students, the first step to maintaining balance on all of your things is to stop whatever the heck you're doing, take a deep breath, okay, and then think about what you want to do. So stop, think, and breathe. It will give you a moment. There's almost nothing in aviation that should require seconds to avoid death. If you've gotten to that point, you're way past any of this, and there's really nothing you can do because you're just riding the train to the station. So what you want to do is you just stop, hold the plane in level flight, fly straight ahead unless there's a mountain, okay, and then adjust accordingly. Has anyone ever flown to Northampton, Massachusetts? Pretty cool airport, right? It's right there on the river. It's not big, not anything terribly impressive, but there is, when you're at traffic pattern altitude and descending to land on runway 14, there's a mountain just across the river that is actually higher than you are, surprisingly enough. Once you get about below 800 feet, there's Mount Tom. It's right there, and it's above where you will be. I'm flying out there with a student one day about 6 or 7 years ago. We're on downwind, and we're coming in, and I look, and his hands are getting white, and he's starting to look around. He's starting to sweat. He reaches up off the throttle with his right hand and puts it on the other hand on the yoke, because when you have two hands on the yoke, you're twice as good of a pilot. So he puts his hands on the yoke, and we're coming in. We're on downwind and we're descending, and he just looks over to me. You would have thought that he just watched his best friend get abducted by aliens. He looks at me and he goes, "What are we going to do?" And I just kind of look over and I go, "We could turn the airplane and not hit the mountain." That would be preferable. And he goes, he just all of a sudden, the color comes back into his face. It hadn't even occurred to him to just turn. Like, don't just turn left. He looks, he goes, Oh, yeah, all right. Okay, we turned left and very uneventfully landed. It was nice, but it was stress had piled up, and he had become so fixated on the fact that there was a mountain that he forgot that he was in an airplane. He could just not hit the mountain. So the keys to managing stress, anybody who's read the books, anybody who's talked to somebody from the FAA, you've heard the DECIDE model, all right? Detect, estimate, choose, identify, do, and evaluate, okay? You don't have to remember the acronym. You don't have to remember the definitions. all this is just a 6-step process, a very basic thing. So you stop, you take a deep breath or 5, right? Count to 30. Think about what you need to do and what you want to do. And then with this, you have to detect a change has occurred. Now, I'm not going to get too much into it, but one of the best ways to detect a change has occurred is to have a strong fundamental knowledge of aviation theory and practical application of that theory, okay? What I mean is things like flying the traffic pattern the same way every time, entering on a crosswind in the same point. When you fly on a traffic pattern and you enter a downwind, do you enter the downwind leg at the same position? You hear instructors say, oh, just take the extra time and fly a traffic pattern. All well and good, but if your traffic pattern sucks and looks like a rhombus, okay, which is a weird shaped square, it's not even worth it. Just do whatever crazy thing you were going to do anyway. You want to have a technically sound approach to consistently repeat the same things. Anybody who is a pilot for hire, and everybody knows at least a couple, they will tell you the biggest thing in training is they're standardizing procedure. The reason you want to have standardized procedures that you follow and do every time to a pain in the ass thing where your friend has to pee or you have to pee, but you're going to fly the traffic pattern, you're going to enter it the same damn way that you always fly it. The reason you're standardizing that is so that you can detect a change. People who don't fly a lot, people who have weaker foundational skills and just kind of fly by the seat of their pants basically, will have a harder time detecting a change because they don't have a standardized way they do it. If you always do something the same way, it's a lot easier to detect a difference, okay? That's the key thing in this, is you're detecting a change has been made. All the rest of this stuff, all you're doing is you're deciding something has changed and you're saying, what do I have to do to fix this? And then do that. And then you once you've done that, like in a crosswind landing, when you overshoot the final, you're getting blown all over the place, and you think you have the right wind correction, but you're not holding the runway and you're getting blown all over the place, you shouldn't just ride the train into the station and smash into the ground, right? You should reevaluate and say, what I did sort of worked, but sort of worked doesn't look like it's going to be good enough. I should now change something that I'm going to do. Do something else, whether it's a go-around, more rudder, more aileron, more practice. You got to evaluate that. You can repeat this as necessary, and we do repeat this. Every single thing that you do when you get ready to go fly, come to the airport, plan your flight, get in your plane, fly, go somewhere, land, you're deciding. It's a constant, it's basically just a math problem. You're getting a problem, you're solving it. Typically these things are small, like I said. What happens is we fly to the same 3 airports, Plymouth, Fitchburg, and Block Island, on a rotating schedule of Plymouth, Fitchburg, Block Island. Yes! Sometimes, if there's a fly-in, you might fly out to Nantucket for like that special occasion. But they have a $5 landing fee now, so I don't want to go in there. God, I can't afford it. You're constantly making decisions, whether you realize it or not. The more aware of it you are, the better you will be to cope with it. Other factors, I kind of just started talking it. Strong technical piloting skills. Do you always do the same thing the same way? Do you always do your pre-flight the same way? I've seen people come in and every time they pre-flight the airplane, and they have hundreds of hours of flight time, every time they pre-flight the airplane, they don't do it in the same way, and it baffles me. I'm like, how do you even remember how to do it different ways? I just don't get it. It's weird. A thorough understanding of aeronautical theory. This is kind of the semi-boring part, but all of you are kind of exercising your brains right now because you're showing up to something that's talking about aeronautical theory, okay? It's a human factor, but that is actually the only factor in aviation because I don't know which one of you can fly these planes sitting in front of it, okay? You have to be in it. It needs a human gushy brain. Constant practice. probably the most important thing, because if you're not flying, you can be thinking about flying as much as you want, but your left side of your brain, or according to the diagram, that's not a technical medical description, but we're calling it the left side because that's where I put it. That side gets weak if it isn't exercise. So it's like running. You know, you're not going to not run for a year and then go do a marathon. I mean, maybe you will, but you're going to have a brutal month following the marathon if you can even finish. New experiences. I emphasize this with everybody that I talk to. Doesn't matter if you're my student or just some guy I met. Do something new. The more new experiences you expose yourself to, the greater your total bank of experience and the more plastic your brain will be to new experience, meaning the amount of knowledge you remember and can actually use from that experience is going to increase because you're constantly exercising that other side of your brain. Total experiences. If you have a new experience every year, but it's because you only fly for 1 hour, it's probably not that good. You're not really practicing, and you're not really getting new experiences. You're just repeating old experiences, and they seem new because it's so far apart. That's pretty much it, I guess. Thanks.
Thanks.